Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. We just talked about some of the biggest moves from day 2 of free agency. We are going to be getting now into the Carolina Panthers and their situation as a whole. I will note very briefly that the Chargers have just released wide receiver Mike Williams. That just broke. I guess brief 10-second thoughts here is it's not overly surprising. Williams has dealt with a lot of injuries. We know that the talent is there, but the Chargers are in a horrendous salary cap situation. They would like to bring him back, but he will be hitting the open market. So I just wanted to address that as it currently breaks. But talking about the Panthers here, they have been given a lot of grief over the course of the past couple days. Really, it's extended to the regular season where David Tepper, he was throwing drinks on fans during the games. The reputation coming out of the building was that he was overly hands-on and was a little bit of a distraction for the locker room at times and for the coaching staff in terms of allowing them to run the type of team that they were hoping to. Tepper recently bought the Panthers, has been a very successful businessman, but sort of seemed to take the lesson that dealing with businesses outside of the NFL versus inside the NFL is definitely a different monster when it comes to actually how to build a team. And supposedly he's supposed to be taking a step back now, which should be a step in the right direction for the Panthers, but it has not come without some bodies along the way. Some dead bodies, you could call it, specifically with the mismanagement of the Brian Burns situation. I won't get too in-depth with it again because we talked about it yesterday. We've talked about it for the past couple weeks, the way that this is all played out. But a massive mismanagement with Brian Burns and his contract. Now, you've all heard the rumors that have come out that it is pretty legitimate or thought out to be that the Panthers were offered multiple first-round picks and a second-round pick from the LA Rams during the 2022 NFL season, and they chose to turn it down. They got another year and a half out of Burns. In 2023, Burns took a little bit of a step back. Ultimately, still a fine player, and he's still very young, so I don't think it should be any major signs for concern for the Giants who have now acquired him. But they then franchise tagged him, refused to have any sort of contract negotiations, and trade him for just a second-round pick and a 5th round pick. Or was it a 6th round pick? Along those lines, though, 2nd round pick, day 3 pick, not enough for the talent that is Brian Burns. And they sold low on him in general because there was never going to be less of a value than currently. He was coming off of a down season. He didn't have a long-term contract already set in place, and they decided to move off from him, which I think is a mistake because the Panthers currently are a bad team, as we know. They won just 1 game last year, and they should be having the number 1 overall pick this upcoming season, except for the fact that they traded it last season in order to move up to the number 1 spot and select Bryce Young. So this obviously has been a very rough stretch for the Panthers from a general manager standpoint. They've made a trade, they cleaned house, and now they have a new slate with a new head coach in Dave Canales that they are hoping to turn this situation around. But as it currently stands, with the amount of talent that is on the roster, you don't have all too many players that you really need to go out and pay the big money to because of the fact that you're very undermanned in terms of talent. So they instead have all this extra money that they can potentially go out and spend, and they should have, in my opinion, used that on Brian Burns, bring him back for another year and try and at least sell him off at the deadline this year to a contending team that needs an edge rusher, or next offseason. Unless you think he's going to fall off a cliff this year, this was going to be the lowest you could possibly trade him for, and they did it. I suppose they just wanted a fresh start, but I think that that is poor management. Now, they did have all of this extra money. They go out and they sign a couple of offensive guards that also has a lot of people talking. They bring in Robert Hunt from the Dolphins, a 5-year deal worth $100 million, and Damian Lewis from the Seahawks, a 4-year deal worth $53 million. These should, in theory, be upgrades to the situation that they had last year, but neither of these players are all-pro talents, Pro Bowl talents, at least haven't shown to be just yet. They're both starters, which is a start for them because they are very much undermanned across really the offense as a whole, but the offensive line was a big issue, especially considering you have this small quarterback in Bryce Young that you've invested so much into in terms of the compensation for the trade rights to him, and you haven't really put any talent around him yet or protected him up front. So that's what they did. They have all of this money. I do understand that these contracts that they gave out to the guards were very expensive and could be seen as bad deals. I do also just want to point out that the way that this is all unfolded for them, and this is going to be a comment that is defending them, but it's like they've been so poorly managed over the course of the past couple seasons. They almost had to overpay in order to get players to come to their organization because they've put out nothing from a front office and from a product on the field as being worth investing into. So as a result, they have to go out and pay Hunt and Lewis these big time deals for more than most people were probably expecting them to go make. But I also don't disagree with the moves because it's not like they're spending this money in the near future on any other real game-changing players. You look at their roster as a whole, and it's kind of hard to find people that other teams are going to have to specifically game plan for, which is kind of a crazy statement, but I also don't know really where the argument is. By the way, I said the Panthers had 1 win. They have 2 wins, so my apologies for being too discrediting of them. But there's just not all that much talent on either side of the ball, and they're hoping to take some steps in the right direction this upcoming season, which is why they go and they invest into the offensive line. Just yesterday, they traded for Deontay Johnson in a deal that included, it was a late pick, and it was one of their cornerbacks as well. Was it Dante Jackson possibly? I'm trying to remember off of the top of my head. It was Dante Jackson. Dante Jackson is a fine player, so it's a little bit of a loss for their defense here, and their defense actually did perform better than many probably expected, but they lose Jeremy Chin, they lose Brian Burns, they now lose Dante Jackson. But the priority for the Panthers this season is going to be trying to elevate the play of Bryce Young and making sure that their investment wasn't all for nothing. And they understand that they are far from contention. That's why they go out, they sign a young head coach in Dave Canales. They give him a longer term deal, almost acknowledging, we know that we are not championship competitive for a few years. We're trying to build this thing up. And I do like the idea of bringing Canales in. I think if Bryce Young is ever going to pan out, Canales should help bring it out of them. They go and they get a lot of people are very split on Deontay Johnson. He's a very good player. He was a little bit disappointing after having some years where there was obviously the touchdown drought for as long as there was, and he went the entire 2022 season without a touchdown after going for over 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns in 2021 that saw him be selected to the Pro Bowl. So disappointing. Last year he dropped even more in terms of passing yards. Now receiving yards, I should say. Now he was dealing with some injuries during the year. The quarterback play and the offense as a whole was not very productive last season in Pittsburgh as well, but he at least caught 5 touchdowns, and I do think that this is at least putting together a bit more of an offense that can help Bryce Young out here. For me, I've never been the highest on Bryce Young, and I feel like there are a lot of excuses being made for Bryce Young. It is fair to some degree, because you look at that Panthers organization and the way they have run the past couple years. It's not a good situation for a young quarterback. I also think that it's so much excuse making that now we can start to see the Panthers putting things together. They're still a ways away. You're hoping that Jonathan Mingo, the second round receiver that they drafted, it was last season, that he can sort of turn himself around. He really struggled in my eyes in that first season, but there also wasn't loads of talent around him as well to help elevate the receiver room. So the Panthers have a long way to go. Bryce Young has a long way to go personally, but this is just kind of where the Panthers are at. They're going to have to overspend on free agents as they build this up. Free agency can be almost a little more harmful than people realize at times when it comes to making a panic move, going out and just throwing money at a player to try and fix a hole. Lucky for the Panthers, they have so many holes that they're not going to be competitive, and they can afford to take on some of these less than ideal contracts. And I say lucky a little bit in an ironic way, but they are able to accept that they know they are probably overspending, but it is for the sake of they have to build themselves up during this period before they can start acting like a Class A franchise, because that's just not what they are right now. They have to prove themselves, basically everybody in that building, and I've been very high on the praise of Dave Canales, head coach, as well, but he is somebody who very quickly moved up the ranks during the NFL. We've seen times in recent history, if you look at Brandon Staley, the way that it can be a mishire, but I believe in Canales. I think that a lot of players on this roster have a lot to prove, and I think they are going to take a step forward. Again, after winning just 2 games this past season, it's almost impossible to take a step backwards, but that is where they are currently at. And now we are going to be taking our second break of the show. When we come back on the other end, we're going to be getting into some college basketball, talking about some of the biggest bubble teams that are playing in conference tournaments throughout the week. So stick with us and we will be right back.